Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 81. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander, and I'm looking to bounce back after an 0-2 against the spread record on our last pod, struggling just as much as some of these conference finals games have been, as it's been blowout central. But despite the disappointing games, the record on the pod is the complete opposite of disappointing as we continue to click at 36 and 28 overall against the spread in the play-in/playoffs and 48, 32 and 1 for my NBA picks overall given out on the DRF Sports Podcast. Now, more on that in a sec, but first, hey Iowa, DRF Sportsbook is sending all parlays to the moon. Start cashing in with DRF Sportsbook's 22% profit boost for all MLB, NBA, or NHL parlays. The MLB season is here, and along with the NBA playoffs and the NHL Stanley Cup Playoffs, so it's time to celebrate, and we want to boost your profits. So head over to the DRF Sportsbook now and start betting. Must be physically present in Iowa to wager. So coming up, more on the NBA Conference Finals, including Game 5 picks between the Mavs and Warriors, and Friday's Game 6. We got picks for you there as well, between the Celtics and the Heat. And that line, woo, it's a crazy line. Stay tuned for that. Plus, of course, a deep dive into what's going on in the Stanley Cup Playoffs as Connor McDavid continues to shine. Of course, Nathan McKinnon doing work as well. Craziness all around. Our guy Matt Russell stops by to break it all down for us, and that starts right about now. Well, it's a happy Thursday morning as once again I'm joined by my guy, Mr. Matt Russell. How are you doing? Hopefully better than the Miami Heat.
Yeah, well, fortunately, my mood or my feeling or my Thursday morning is direct in contrast, right, to the Miami Heat. As honestly, I look back on that Saturday game, one of the weirder games in recent memory, and I just go, man, I'm actually really glad the Heat won that game. We didn't have a bet on that in the game. You know, we talked about obviously betting the Celtics series price before that game, and that just gave us a second opportunity to hammer away on the Celtics. And after, Monday's game, Wednesday's game, that just looks to have been the right decision. And I think we're feeling good about that because as you and I just talked about before we hopped on here, the spread for Game 6 is getting a little out of control.
Yeah, let's get right to it. And as mentioned, mentioned this earlier in the pod, but I went 0-2 on Monday's pod. First losing pod in a while for, I can't even remember, to be honest. And that's not to humble brag. It's just kind of the truth. But either way, 0-2 from the Monday's pod brings us to 36 and 28 against the spread in the play-in/playoffs, 48, 32 and 1 against the spread in the NBA picks overall. And you mentioned it. Last night's game, Celtics Heat. I mean, it was a 1-point game in the third quarter. And then the Celtics just took over, 24-2 run. They never looked back. The final score of 93-80 doesn't really do it justice in terms of, one, just how ugly of a game it was. And it wasn't really that close. Poor shooting. But either way, Celtics now lead the series 3-2 after a huge road win, which brings us to Friday night in Boston. Celtics favored by 9. I had to stare at that a couple times just to make sure. And I can't lie, like the series is a wrap, right? Like the Celtics, the series is over. Now, would I be out here advising someone and being like, hey, you should lay 9 points in Game 6?
Right.
I mean, I can't come out here and strongly say that, but what I do here is I make picks. And if I'm forcing myself to make the pick, I am on the Celtics -9. The theme and trend of blowouts in these playoffs, especially the conference finals, I expect that to continue. And I don't know if the Heat say 1-2-3 Cancun, or if they just say 1-2-3 welcome home to Miami, because hey, you could just stay there and enjoy yourself. But it's just too much for the Heat to overcome. Hero didn't play in the last game, so I don't know how he's going to magically be like fine all of a sudden in Friday's game. And he's obviously a massive part of their offense. Jimmy Butler, who is their MVP, he's super banged up. You're seeing him shoot multiple air balls. Like, he just has no lift on his jump shot at all. He can't carry the load. Kyle Lowry is hobbling and is either like really washed or really hurt, but either way, it's not good. And Bam just isn't that guy. So when you add it all up for a team that is the sum of the parts, which is the Miami Heat, and you're mentioning their top 4 guys, I mean, no real superstar. So Jimmy hurt, Hero hurt, Lowry hurt, Bam not built. It's a wrap. I mean, the Celtics are banged up too, but they just have been getting more contributions from their depth than, you know, as quickly as the Heat need to be sitting there relying on Max Strus, which when it's good, cool. Yeah. Like, you can't really be relying on that, as we've talked about for, you know, the whole playoffs essentially. Yeah. Right? Like, the sooner you get to those type of dudes, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Your boy Strus went full Reggie Bullock last night. not to bring up poor Reggie Bullock again after doing 20 minutes basically on Reggie Bullock, or the concept of Reggie Bullock. But you know what, on Monday we talked about the idea, okay, like, 6.5 points is a lot for that game after the Heat had won that game. And I said, I'm like, you know, you don't have to bet. Like, you obviously, you know, force yourself into making a pick here, right? Like, you're looking for like a daily, you know, game to game action type situation via the point spread. But you know, again, you don't have to bet the point spread in these games, right? And you can take the Celtics on the series price. You take them if you wanted to roll over a money line, or sort of talk about that concept, and just go, okay, like, I don't know that the Celtics are going to cover 6.5 or not. I mean, we probably should have known that if they were going to win, they were going to cover, because in this edition of the NBA playoffs, if you win, you cover, right? So, you know, you don't have to bet the point spread, right? You can just bet the series price. And of course, it turns out that the Celtics cover that number. They cover the number last night, which ended up getting bet out to -3.5. So when it's sort of, you know, you look at the point spread for this game 6 and it's -9, you just sort of sit back, you go, whoa, okay, like, we're up to -9. We were just at -6.5 a couple of days ago. But really the move happened before last night's game to get to -3.5. Because as you know, right, we do the quick home court flip and we go, okay, basically 6 points, right? 3 on one side, 3 on the other. Well, that gets you from 3.5 to 9.5, you know, pretty quickly. Now, again, I don't know that the Heat are even getting a full 3 points. I mean, that place cleared out mega quick last night. I think it was still only like a 13-point game with like 4 minutes left, and there was basically nobody left in the crowd. So that's where that point spread flip comes from. It isn't from last night's game to game 6. It's from game 4 to game 5. Like, the market could see this coming. And obviously the difference between game 5 at -3.5 to games 1 and 2, you remember Heat -3, Heat -1 back in game 2, right? That's the change that has happened. So it happened before yesterday's game, and it turns out it was the right, you know, move. Yeah. That being said, as you mentioned, right, they almost got to a fourth quarter where the game was close, but the third quarter of the game was still close, right? The Heat had the lead, if I'm not mistaken, at halftime. And so, you know, like it is a lot of points, but, you know, I think you're right. Like, the writing may be on the wall here for this Heat team. And again, it isn't necessarily their fault, because I don't think Jimmy Butler goes 4 of 18 if he's fully healthy or even remotely close to it, right? And of course, you mentioned the Tuckers, Lowrys, and whatnot, that there's only so much you're going to be able to get from those guys, even at the best of times, right? It's going to be a relatively inconsistent showing from that group. So, you know, again, you know, who said Celtics, you know, we played this really, really well, right? We went Heat in game 1, then we came back on the Celtics to win the series in game 2, to win game 2. Remember, I mean, just think about it this way, right? Remember the sweet days of getting a Boston Celtics money line price at plus 140 for game 2. Like that obviously never happening again, or certainly not in this series. So played it really well. We were able to press on the Celtics after that weird game 3. Admittedly, we could have more if we just kept banging away on the Celtics on the against the spread. But you know what? It just wasn't sort of worth it given the fact that we had that second opportunity to hit the Celtics on the series price. So again, not over by any means, obviously in a literal sense, but feels a little, over. I would be really shocked if the Heat won outright in this game 6 on Friday. I think you're right. It's probably curtains. It's probably blouses for the Heat in game 6 here.
Yeah, like in Boston too, like that crowd on the brink of making the NBA finals is going to be so fired up. Like I have a tough time seeing Miami winning that game, but it would be
a loss. I'm sorry. I was just going to say it would be a loss for the Celtics that is even more surprising than the money line would indicate, if you know what I mean, right? Like I would be even more surprised by any generic sort of, plus 200, plus 300, plus 4. Like it would even be more surprising than that. Right. Again, I don't know that they cover, but I would be shocked if they lost that game.
Yeah, totally. And it's one of those things where you look at it and it's, shaping up as Celtics in 6. And it's funny. I remember in our preview, we talked about it and my gut was saying, okay, Heat in 7, but I need to see the series and see the matchups because you could talk me into Celtics in 6 very easily. And the reason for that was you actually do need to see the matchups, right? And that's where the kind of game to game, sort of back and forth goes. And, just what happened in this series, I think it's like, there's a couple different factors. The Heat depth didn't hold up, but it's a little more fragile than Boston's, I'd say. But also Robert Williams completely just changes the impact of this series. Like if he was able to play and be healthy the whole time, I don't know if Miami wins a game. Like that's how drastically it changes what Miami's able to do. Because when he wasn't in the game, they're able to get 2s. They're able to drive into the paint and get 2s and mix up their offense. So that it's not just, okay, PJ Tucker corner 3 or Strus coming off a screen 3 or, whatever. You have some variation in their offense. And with Williams in there, there is no variation. It's just 3s. And you know what I'm going to say about that? Like, you're not going to consistently win like that unless you're Steph and Clay in that era of Warriors basketball. Like, it's just too difficult to do. Right. And you talk about guys like Robert Williams, like they just got all these contributors from like Robert Williams to, what's my guy's? I'm drawing a complete Al Horford. Pardon me. Wow.
Sure.
Al Horford had a monster series, and that's out of nowhere. Al Horford comes up and he just had like so many moments in this games. And Grant Williams also had great moments in this series. And you have so many guys. Pritchard had his moments. Marcus Smart had his moments. Whereas you look at Miami and it's like, if it wasn't Jimmy, I mean, Bam had one game.
It's like Robert Williams gives, and this is really simplistic, but it's like Robert Williams gives Bam Adebayo something to do. And that's going to detract from basically his overall game, because when Robert Williams isn't in there, then like Bam Adebayo can do whatever he wants, right? It's like he's giving him busy work essentially. Whereas like the numbers still look okay for Bam. I think he had a double last night. I think he had like 18 points, something along those lines, right?
But it's not as that. I'm not falling for that.
Right. But it's not, but it's not impactful, right? It's still like I'm out there doing like something, but it's not like I'm not having the run of the place, so to speak, right? Like Robert Williams makes him accountable on both ends of the court.
I had to look it up because I saw the tweet last night, but my guy Cuffs the Legend on Twitter sums this up perfectly. Says, some nights Bam looks like an all-star. Some nights he looks like JJ Hickson.
Yeah. And honestly, like if Robert Williams, again, whose numbers by comparison, they had the same amount of rebounds, whatever, like Robert Williams only had 6 points, but like he only took 2 shots. He's bringing the attention of Bam Adebayo in those, again, relatively minimal minutes, right? But those are really important minutes because there isn't a replacement, and you're allowing Horford to maybe play a little bit more on the outside. You're obviously just having 2 bigger bodies out there than the Celtics would normally bring, because honestly, like when your next best big man, I mean, I guess Grant Williams sort of qualifies, but like when the next best guy is, Daniel Tice, who's DNPCDing like these games, like if that's the case when they're fully healthy, and then there are games when he's playing like 20 minutes, like, I mean, that's not hard. That's not complicated, right? Like that's obviously not, that would obviously not be their choice.
Yeah. Just having the front line that is Horford and Williams going against Bam, essentially, who's the only true big on Miami that gets real minutes, right? Like Dedmon comes off the bench, but not really. And then you just have those two going at it. And it's like PJ Tucker's now fighting Tatum and having to hold down the paint and grab rebounds, or Jimmy's having to drop 30 and having to hold down the paint and grab rebounds. Like, it's just a different assignment for so many other people. And the depth factor just proved to be too much for Miami. And their wins came when there was no Robert Williams, or he was, hobbled.
Yeah. And I mean, who knows? Right? It seems to be game to game for him. But like, even just something as simple as like, what if Al Horford was on the Heat? Right. Because then that changes the dynamic. When, I mean, honestly, sometimes it's as simple, as much as we talk about like 3-pointers and all these and the variance and all that sort of thing. Like sometimes it is as simple when we're talking about shot creation and defensive shot, whatever the opposite of shot creation is for defensively. Sometimes it's as simple as like, you guys got two big guys who can play and you got one.
Yeah.
And as long as that's a 2-to-1 situation, like your defense is going to be better and your offense is going to be better.
Yeah. Like, I mean, there's no actual stat to quantify the effect of Jimmy Butler having the ball, driving to the basket, and how hard or consistently he's going to be driving to the basket when Williams is there compared to when he's not there. Right. Like there's no, like you can look at like a shot chart, I guess, but even still, like that's changing the mentality or like the nature of those shots regardless. Right. The shots. That
that's as simple as that's the simplest field goal percentage, right? Like the 4 of 18, like I know that's like doesn't encompass everything that we would, ideally want to. And like maybe player efficiency is better in this case, but like, it's not a coincidence. It's not like he had open shots. Obviously he took 5 3-pointers out of those 18 shots. So there's 13 shots from inside the 3-point line that are being defended, obviously in a different way than they would be whenever Robert Williams is not in that game. Right. So it's not a coincidence, I don't think.
Yeah, really interesting series for sure in the context of just seeing how important matchups are, right? And just, you literally had games where the Celtics had everybody, and then they had games where there was no Marcus Smart. Then Marcus Smart was in, but Grant Williams was out. Like it was such a juggling act, like Al Horford having COVID or being on the COVID list in game 2. That seems so long ago now, right? But there's so much juggling. Game 1, maybe, whatever.
I think it was one, right?
It just seems so like long ago that there's been so many different iterations of the Celtics lineup and then the Heat lineup. So trying to figure out those matchups took longer than we might have thought. And yet we're still here with Celtics in 6. Right? Like it's so funny how it works. So give me the Celtics -9 for sure. That's just where it is. And, as we do like a pod twice a week and, people check in, they want to be like, I don't know what to bet on tonight. Let me see what's going on. Trying to give the people just a little something, right? We switch to the West and a 119-109 victory by the Mavs in game 4. They get on the board in the series. Warriors lead 3-1. Game 5 goes Thursday in Golden State. Warriors favored by 7 points. I'm going to be on the Warriors. And, I said once they went up 3-0, like the series is a wrap. Give the Mavs credit for not folding and getting a win at home. A very weird game with like the roof leaking and a huge delay before the start of the third quarter, which was super weird. But much like the Celtics going home in game 6 with a chance to clinch and advance to the NBA Finals, I'd be stunned if the Warriors lost this game at home with a chance to go to the NBA Finals, right? Like, I don't know which crowd is going to be more fired up to get back to the finals because it's been, an interesting ride for both franchises and fan bases and organizations. But the playoffs have just been a theme of blowouts. So I'm not even afraid of a Warriors -7 just because a theme that I've talked about a lot is when the Warriors win, they win by a lot. And so I think they're going to win this game. I look at, go on.
No, I was just gonna say, well, like the theme is when anybody wins, they win by a lot, right?
For sure.
So you're right. Like you don't have to be afraid of laying points if you believe one team is going to win or the other, right? And it doesn't really matter how evenly matched they are. Like again, like there's just kind of no reason to be like, because again, you win, you're going to cover like that. Or listen, that's not in any way, and it should be mentioned, that's not in any way predictive going forward. But how many times on a night-to-night basis are we just going to bang our head against the wall here, going like, oh yeah, we weren't going to get a close game between two teams that were 4 or 5 point spread, where the spread mattered. In this case, like I can't. If you like the Warriors, then yeah, go for it. Because, again, people talk about the 3-point shooting variance, like, yeah, it could very well be a blowout or at least a comfortable victory, or they could be tied with 5 minutes to go and still win by 10 points. Like that, there's no reason to be afraid of laying the points necessarily.
Yeah. And like the Warriors, what happened from my perspective in game 4, essentially, I mean, yeah, obviously the Warriors wanted to win the game. Obviously you're trying to win the game, but Kerr, I mean, I'm not going to get into like his speech and what he was talking about before the game. Like, we'll keep it to basketball on this like gambling pod, but you could tell my guy was kind of on a different vibe and even said as much as this game doesn't really matter. And then in the first half, he was throwing out lineups with like Moses Moody, Kuminga, and Poole all on the floor at the same time in the first quarter of a game or first half of a game that was like in the balance with a chance to clinch. I'm not saying they're throwing the game, but I'm saying there's a lot of tinkering going on that there's a longer leash, we'll say, with a lot of his young guys and rookies, which is not normal to what he was doing for the rest of the playoffs at all. And they kept it close, they kept it close. They still had a chance to win. Then it got kind of out of hand. He let the kids rock for the majority of the fourth quarter, and the kids almost brought them back to the point where the starters had to check back into the game because they were down. I think they cut it to like 13. Like they had a chance to actually like make it a game. They got it to under 10, right? So the Warriors, not much happened in that game that like deterred me off of the main thought process of what's been going on in this series. I mean, the Mavs hit threes at home in like a less pressurized situation because you're down 3-0, right? And Finney Smith's hitting 4 threes. Bullock hit 6 threes. Kleber and Dinwiddie with multiple threes as well. The shots fell for them, which, as I said, you can do that, but can you do it on the road and in a more pressurized situation? I don't think so. But yeah, Warriors -7. That's kind of where I'm going to be on that one. Good job, good effort, Mavs. I think it's good when a team gets to end their home season with the win in front of their crowd. They had a good season overall. Good job, good effort. You go to Golden State and get blown out, nobody's going to be mad at you.
Yeah, and all that stuff is absolutely true and very legitimately possible. And we talked about this, before the last game. And again, I didn't want anything to do with the Warriors in that game because of just the mentality in that. And because, as you mentioned, right, like the Mavs aren't some team that are just dying to get the season over with, whether it's because of injury or just strife. Yeah. Right. When a team gets swept, a lot of times it's because of one of those two things, right? Either they're just unmanned relative to their sort of normal state, or whether their normal state, is, or should say they are uninterested relative to their normal state, right? Like that we should have some expectation, picture the Sixers, picture the Nets, something along those lines, right? Where the expectation is never actually met during the season and they realize that they are just not good enough, right? And so and Dallas just is not that, right? There is hope for Dallas in the future, if you will, right? There is reason to be excited. So all of that stuff, by and large, now is, frankly, pretty narrative based, because right now we have 192 minutes of basketball between these two teams over the course of 4 games. And the Mavs, you mentioned the Mavs shot well, and that's why they won. They won by 10 points. And the game was, again, once you get to the fourth quarter, and that game was, 20-point game, and the benches are emptied and all of that sort of thing, it's yet another effective blowout, right? Now the bench guys sort of got that weirdly close. I think they cut it to like 8 with a couple of minutes to go. But the point is, right, like Dallas won that game comfortably. And you and I talked about like the shot quality elements of, okay, like the Warriors win by this many, but what was the shot quality, or, the comeback, obviously in game 2, all of that sort of thing. and that the Mavs played better than anybody's giving them credit for. They just didn't make their shots, but they made them this time around. But nothing really changed. It works both ways, right? Nothing really changed from a shot quality standpoint. The shot quality was 117 to 116. That was a 1-point game from a shot quality standpoint. And so again, maybe it's because, as we talked about on Monday's show, whether it's, call it whatever you want, right? Clutch, pressurized. I really like that term. Like if it was there was no pressure in the building for the Mavericks to make these shots, then they make them, then yeah, like that's going to be a problem for the Mavs going forward. But if it was just a matter of variance, that over the course of 192 minutes, you get, 100 plus 3-pointers, there's going to be streaks where you shoot 60%. There are going to be streaks where you shoot 30%. That's just how numbers work. And so I'm looking at these shot quality numbers, and I'll go game by game for you. Game 1, Mavericks 107, Warriors 105. Game 2, Mavericks 114, Warriors 112. Game 3, Mavericks 110, Warriors 100. Game 4, 117 to 116, as I mentioned. And so over the course of 192 minutes, the average score of these games from a shot quality creation and shot quality defense standpoint are Mavs 112, Warriors 108.25. And so, yes, the Warriors might just have that clutch, might just have that ability to shoot in pressurized situations, and the Mavs might not have that. And if that's going to be why the Warriors cover this game, I'm content with that. But we have gotten enough of a sample size, like you just talked about with Miami and Boston, seeing the matchup. And again, we are a pretty epic collapse from the Mavericks away from this being just a 2-2 series going back to Golden State. And if that doesn't happen, now you can easily say, listen, whether you want to besmirch the Mavs or whether you want to give credit to the Warriors, the reality is that did happen. But we were at a point where you could live bet the Warriors at a pretty considerable price. And so if everybody was so convinced that the Warriors were going to make that comeback, they're welcome to show me the tickets on the live money line. But the reality is a lot of people in that third quarter were like, wow, the Mavs are going to steal this game. Or I shouldn't even say steal, because they were just the better team for the majority of that game. But because you want to assign a narrative to it, right? They got too excited, they got whatever, they thought they had that game won, whatever you want to sort of say to it. The point is that the Mavericks could have won that game. And if they had, I shouldn't say should have won that game. And if they had, we'd be looking at a 2-2 series. And if we're looking at a 2-2 series on that big board up there, that's a lot more attributable to this shot quality, right? Those two things would make a lot more sense. A shot quality that has had 3 of the 4 games be within 2 points would make a lot of sense for a 2-2 series. So unfortunately for the Mavericks, they're not going to win this series because it was 3-0, of course now 3-1, but that's really just on a quarter and a half of basketball. And so over the course of, 16 quarters, these teams are creating the same amount of shots, the same quality of shots, I should say, to essentially get the same amount of points. In fact, obviously the Mavericks with actually a little bit better. Now, again, all that could go out the window because the Warriors, could have that killer instinct, all of those cliches that we use, right? And the Mavs could not have that, they could just be content with that one win. You had Luka sort of not making excuses, but sort of saying listen, I'm young, there's going to be plenty of, times ahead of me, blah, blah, blah. They might not show up for the game, and the Warriors might have that killer instinct, and this might completely flip. But all I can do is look at what happens during a season, what happens during a postseason, and what happens during this series, and go, okay, what makes sense to me from a mathematical standpoint, right? Based on the analytics of play. And I'm not the one in charge of doing the math or evaluating these shots, right? I'm going to rely on others to do that. And so I look at it and I go, this line opened at 7.5 and it's down to 7, because I looked at 7.5 and I was like, well, we can't have gone up, right? Because we've gone from 5 in game 1 to 6.5 in game 2. And now we're in game 5 and we're going up, up, up. And there just isn't anything in the play that would show me or tell me that the spread needs to be higher other than the final scores of some of these games. But that's the point. that's what we're supposed to be doing as bettors. We're supposed to be looking deeper than the final score. And so that's what we're doing here. And we're going, yeah, the final score of that game too, where the Warriors managed to cover that game despite being down like 20 points in the second half, like that's a misleading final score. And the series at 3-1 is a misleading tally right now. And so if that's the case, then I'm sort of obligated to bet on Dallas +7 in this game and sort of let the chips fall where they may. Because I did that in game 2. And unfortunately, right, the chips didn't just fall. They sat on their side and they spun around and they waited like it was, the thimble in what's the Leo DiCaprio movie where at the time with the time travel? Well, you're blanking on it hard. Inception. Yes, I got it. It's like an Inception situation, right? Where it's like, okay, like eventually the thimble, or it's not a thimble. What is it? The spindle? I don't even know. Point is, eventually the chips are going to fall one way or another. And I just think that the Warriors have been, it's funny. You can't assign the word lucky to a team like the Warriors with the pedigree that the Warriors have, because you sound like a crazy person, because like, oh, it's the Warriors, like they've won all these titles. But isn't that kind of the point too? Because if the shots are falling for the Warriors, we brush this off as like the Warriors being notably superior. But when they're not falling, we just sort of chalk it up to, 3-point making variance. Like we go, oh yeah, Dallas like hit all their threes. And it's like, yeah, or they're just taking turns at this point, like creating offense and creating shots that are going to accumulate an expected amount of points. And 3 times it's gone the Warriors' way and 1 time it's gone Dallas's way, despite the fact that these games are being played relatively evenly. And it's possible that Dallas, over the course of 6 games, is going to have an even amount of wins to the Warriors. And honestly, if they won this game, it would be really hard to not bet them to win game 6 back in Dallas. And so I just look at it and I go, I have to acknowledge the fact that like these games on average are 112, 108 for the Mavericks. And because they haven't hit shots, and I understand why anyone would believe that like the Mavericks aren't going to make shots in the next game, that's entirely, as we've seen, a great possibility, if not probability. But for me here, like, and honestly, the other thing with regards to the point spread is like, yes, I have to take the +7, but I also have to take the money line in this, because we're getting +245 at this point. We have gotten out to a +245 in games that are effectively coin flips. And the coin flip isn't like who's going to get the last basket in the way that we think a lot of coin flip basketball games are, right? We think of hockey, game goes to overtime. Okay, this was a coin flip game. Basketball, oh, this went, tie game, 5 seconds to go, inbound play, like that's a coin flip game. Unfortunately for the NBA, and the reason these games are all blowouts, is the coin flip happens essentially before the game, or sort of throughout the game, where who is going to shoot 45% from 3 and who's going to shoot 35% from 3, because so many 3-pointers are going up that relatively small difference ends up being like a 25-point difference on the scoreboard if you're hitting 7 extra threes, 8 extra threes. But honestly, that's just a coin flip situation too, because all of these teams effectively shoot the exact same from a long-term perspective, right? Like the Mavericks aren't notably worse. I don't even think they are worse from a 3-point shooting standpoint than the Warriors. And yeah, the Warriors get easier 2-point baskets, but there's a reason analytics exist, because the 3-pointer, obviously you can shoot a worse percentage shooting threes than the other team who's shooting a better percentage shooting 2s and still win the game. So it all comes out in the wash as these 2-point games. These games should be 2-point games, but because of 3-point variance, they're not. And so instead of the close NBA playoff basketball that you and I are used to from the 90s and the 2000s, or heck, last season, we're getting these drastic variance things that are, we're not getting sweeps. We're getting 5, 6, 7 game series that are all blowouts. Or in the case of, remember, Memphis and Minnesota, you get halves that are blowouts. Minnesota would have a 20-point victory in the first half. Memphis would have a 20-point victory in the second half. And all of that is just shooting variance. But when you come into the game and both teams essentially shoot the same from the 3-pointer or from a combination of 3 and 2, which is what shot quality is, these games are all coin flips. And if I'm getting +245 on a coin flip, if we're going to start flipping coins right now and you're telling me I'm getting plus 245 on tails, like heads can come up 10 straight times and plus 245 on tails is still a good bet. And so I have to keep betting on the Mavericks here and sort of take it. And by the way, if the Mavericks win one game as plus 245 underdogs, that covers literally 2.5 other losses, right? And again, maybe we don't see that. And again, maybe the Warriors win, maybe the Warriors cover, maybe they win by 20, who knows? But just from a strictly betting standpoint, betting obviously being different than just picking games and sort of, basic level type stuff. Plus 245 just has to be a bet. And it's not comfortable because it's plus 245. And frankly, it's probably going to lose. But this isn't a 3-1 series. This isn't even Boston, Miami, where you put the shot quality matchup there, because Boston has a better shot quality score by a mile than the Warriors do. But we still have to go to a game 6 because of variance and weird stuff happening. And obviously the injuries and stuff that have made that a really weird series to try to predict. We haven't had the injuries. We know what we're going to get from these teams, at least from a health standpoint, who's going to take the shots, who's going to get the minutes. And again, a lot of it comes down to Reggie Bullock and Bertans and Maxi Kleber. And sometimes they shoot well and sometimes they don't. In game 3 on the road, they shot well. They should have won that game. In game 4, they didn't at all. And so they didn't. Game 5, they were back, game 4, they were back at home and they shot well. In game 3, they didn't. Point is, if I'm getting plus 245, then I just have to rely on the Bullocks, the Bertans, the Klebers to hit those shots and maybe just be a little bit better defensively so that it isn't just an absolute layup line for the Warriors. But I get the concept, right? Like there's a reason why the Warriors lost that game from a sort of a motivational standpoint, but it was also one of their better games from a shot quality creation standpoint. And yeah, a lot of those shots are being taken by guys who aren't that good, but that's built into the shot quality numbers. So it's not a comfortable spot, but yeah, I got to take Dallas plus 7 and plus 245 to win this game and force a game 6.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting, right? And it's just interesting to discuss and sort of the narratives around betting and also just talking about the games. And I think it's important too for people to understand the difference between making bets based solely on the numbers and then making bets based off adding in the basketball stuff and all that, right? Because there is a logic to it when you're talking about probabilities and odds, and the numbers will tell you have to make this bet because blank percent of the time there's a chance you win, and then that covers this and that, right? So totally understand that. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that side of it as well. Because the basketball side of it, it's so funny because it kind of goes not counter to that, but I think it's more so, a deeper discussion in the sense that, when people say things like, oh, you just need a basket, right? Can you get a basket? And then that's where, the shot quality and the shot variance becomes so strange. And you have you get pitted on these sides because you hear the old coaches who are covering a game and they'll say things like, wait a second, that's a 3-on-1 fast break. Why the hell is this guy running to the 3-point line? And that's a terrible shot. And no one will be able to convince me otherwise that is a bad shot, right? You take a layup, right? Yeah. But that's at the crux of what this discussion is, right? Because it's good shots and bad shots and, how you're able to define, something like that. Yes, you can always look at numbers and say, hey, the probability of this shot going in, he shoots 40%, and it's cool and it makes total sense. And I get it. But it's so funny because the playoffs and basketball has always been about who can get a bucket when you need a bucket. Right.
But you know what, though? The problem is none of these games are coming down to needing a bucket. And
it's not about winning a bucket at the end of the game. It's perfect example. Go back to the Kawhi run with the Raps, right? So you're down 10 points, right? You're down 10 points. You need a bucket to keep the game close. It's not just about needing a bucket to win the game.
You can need a bucket whenever at that point, though.
Of course you can. Yeah. But that's why we talk about Chris Paul in different contexts and we talk about other point guards, right? How do you manage the game? And I'm talking prime Chris Paul, not this Chris Paul, but how do you
Chris
manage
Paul that won all those titles?
No. Come on. Like, how do you manage a game, right? Is more so what I'm talking about, right? And so, like, there are just points in a game where it's getting close, or how do you extend a lead from like 5 points to 10 points, 10 points to 15 points? Like, those little things that like aren't really like, there's not a stat to quantify that. But when you're a team and you're the Warriors and Steph knows, okay, I got to stop this run. Let me just get a foul here so I can get to the free throw line. Like, there's not a stat to quantify how he takes that lead from 10 to 15. Do you know what I mean? Like, those things don't exist. And that to me is the beauty of these discussions, because there is no like actual right answer is what I'm saying. That's all. Like, all I'm saying is like the stats will tell you, the stats are part of the story, but the beauty of it is that we're still talking about humans, right? And so there are things that make these things different than like 40% from this guy isn't 40% from the other guy.
Yeah, that's the debate. And if you've decided that 2 points at the start of the fourth quarter is more valuable than 3 points in the first quarter, then like, I'm not going to be able to talk you out of that. Right. Like, it's like a lot of other things in life. Like, if you're going to die on that vine, like, that's fine. But my point is like, these fourth quarters are so boring. And so like, they're just not, we've gotten to a point where they're just not competitive because it's already a 20-point game. It's because of the accumulation of the first three quarters and what teams are doing to be efficient. Right. And it isn't like one possession, it's literally hundreds of possessions back and forth. And so if you are getting a 0.1 points per possession advantage over the course of 3 possessions, well, like, that's vulnerable. You're not, like, that hole can get punched through. But if you're getting a 0.1 point per possession advantage over the course of 100 possessions, like, that is how you stretch a lead, right? By consistently taking good shots. Now, good shot doesn't have to be the 3-pointer on the 3-on-1 fast break. The problem, I think, there is like, are you taking a contested layup, or are you able to pass, well enough that you're getting like the wide open layup? Because wide open 3 is a better shot than contested layup. The issue is we should be able to get ourselves a wide open layup on a 3-on-1.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Right? Like, no, but that's exactly the point, right?
Right. Yeah. And so like, okay, but if all we're doing in the sort of, I'll call it the Steph Curry era of basketball, is practicing 3-pointers and practicing wide open 3-pointers off of the fast break, the calculus becomes a little bit different, right? Because if you spent 10 years of your basketball, or your entire, like, if you go from age 15 to age 25, where all you're practicing on a 3-on-1 fast break is spotting up for a 3, getting a wide open 3, something that an NBA player is going to hit at like a 75% rate. And you're practicing that instead of
75%,
like wide open 3-pointer for a Steph Curry.
I don't think
Steph Curry's making a wide open. Steph Curry's making a wide open.
How many people are Steph Curry? And that's kind of my point.
Well,
right?
Steph Curry's making it like 100% of the like, I'm like a wide open,
not everyone is Steph
3.
Curry, and that's kind of the problem, right?
Right, but like, you're also assuming that layup is going to be 100%, and that's just not the case, right? It's like you're making assumptions that 2 points guaranteed versus like whatever percent you want to put it, even if it's 65%, like, that's still a 65% 3-point shot is the same value as a 100% 2-point shot. They are both worth 2 points in expected value. And that doesn't do you any good on the last shot of the game if you can guarantee yourself 2 points. But we're not ever getting to the last shot of the game. That's not the NBA anymore. We are only getting accumulations of plays over and over and over again. And then eventually the team that's making 0.1 point per possession, a lot of P's in there, those are the teams that are winning these games. And we also don't know which team it's going to be before that game starts, right? It is essentially just kind of up to, honestly, shot variance, and whether those shot variances are layups or whether they're 3-pointers, right? Like, if the layup, that uncontested or semi-contested layup, or however you want to put it, because like, defenders on those fast breaks, like they know, okay, I can only guard one thing. And you're taught from a young age, like I'm going to guard the rim here, right? Whoever's going to take this shot isn't going to do so with an uncontested layup. I'll give up an uncontested 5-footer. I'll give up an uncontested 10-footer. I have to give up a uncontested 3-pointer in this situation. So like, you're not getting 2 points guaranteed ever in this situation, because by the way, if a guy's even within reach, he's going to foul you, at which point, like, yes, you get 2 free throws, but you know what else isn't guaranteed? Free throws. So you're only going to get, on average, a 75% free throw shooter is on average going to get 1.5 points for that. So, okay, so now if the choice is a guy getting fouled to get 1.5 points on average versus a guy getting a wide open 3, well, what's a wide open 3 for 1.5 points? It's 50%. Now I'm here to tell you the guy who is going to not post up, but spot up for that 3-point shot, wide open again, having practiced it for 10 years, because that's the way we play basketball now in the Steph Curry era. That's a better than 50% shot. So like, that's where the math comes in. If you're hitting 55% on that wide open shot over the course of time, that's a better play than getting fouled and going to the basket, or like going to the basket, getting fouled for 2 shots. Like, that's where the math comes in. And the accumulation over a 24-second shot clock over 3 quarters with all the possessions back and forth, that's what's leading to these 15, 20-point games after 3 quarters. So the idea of like, just give it to Kevin Durant, he's going to get us a bucket to win the game at the end, becomes moot. And that's the point. That's why all of these teams, because the 5 teams in the NBA that have that dude, whether it's LeBron, Kevin Durant, even Luka Doncic, like those guys who are going to get you the game-winning basket under like triple team, like complete chaos at the end, all the other 25 teams are going like, honestly, let's just get this game over with one way or another, but by 3 quarters. Like that, like, let's find our advantage in the first quarter at 0.1 points per possession. PPP is what I'm calling it from here on in. Let's accumulate that over 3 quarters so that we don't have to deal with Kawhi at the end of a basketball game, because now his mid-range shot getting to his spot becomes the difference between winning and losing. They don't want to have to deal with LeBron, Kawhi, Luka, Durant, etc., Steph Curry at the end of games. They want to be able to find their advantages with the second team, with how they play in general. And that's why we're getting these 15 to 20 point. It's not because the advent of the 3-point line, the 3-point lines existed for 30 years. It's not necessarily that kids are practicing 3-pointers, though that obviously helps with regards to strategy. And that's why the Warriors were advanced, right? That's why they went to 5 straight and NBA finals. It wasn't just like, hey, your players are better than our players. It certainly helped that they deployed that while having those dudes who can get that basket at the end of the game. But like 2 points in the third quarter isn't any better than 2 points in the first quarter. And like, that's the thing that people have to understand when it comes to betting these games. Now, again, if you pile up a ton of 2s over in that third quarter or in any quarter, like, yeah, it's going to work out for you. And I don't know that there's anything Dallas can do to stop the Warriors from piling up the 2s the way that the Warriors do basic, like, I shouldn't say basic, but like traditional quality basketball things, moving the basketball, right? Dribble penetration, passing the ball, kicking out, getting good matchups, all of that stuff. But there is a stat for that. All of that stuff is built into it. And so whether you decide to do 3-point shooting contests like the Mavericks, or whether you decide to do like the pretty version of basketball, if it all comes out in the wash at the end to be a close game, then like there's obviously 2 ways to do it. Now, the problem is on a game-to-game basis, one team is going to make more and the other team's not. Because honestly, any basketball game, whether it's college or pro, just look at the shooting and you're going to know without looking at the scoreboard who won the game, because everything else by and large is pretty equal. I mean, even the Celtics had like 30 more free throw attempts than the Heat did the other night, and they lost the game. And so like fundamentally, it just comes down to like, did you make shots? And that's what this game's going to come down to. And the Warriors are going to cover this game. It's because they made shots. The Mavericks are going to cover or win this game outright. It's because they made shots. Now, I can say, like, I don't really believe that the Bertans, Kleber, Bullock crew is going to make shots this game. And you know what? Like, maybe I'm right and maybe I'm wrong, and we'll see. But like, the point is like, we've played 4 games in this series, and 2 of them, those guys have made shots, and 2 of them they haven't. And if you're going to give me plus 245, unfortunately for me, I have to put my faith in those 3 guys to have the 2 good games versus the 2 bad games, right? That's just a bankroll management betting sort of, that's kind of basic, right? Like, I just have to do that. I'm not loving it. I wish it was 3 guys who I felt better about hitting shots in sort of pressurized situations and on the road. But like, it could be worse, I suppose. It could be guys who have literally never done it. So I just got to do it.
Yeah, no, I totally hear where you're coming from. I totally understand the math angle of it. I just love the narrative of the conversation of where we believe that there's a stat to tell us literally everything. And like, we remove the human element out of it sometimes, right? And like, that basketball 3-on-1 break, like, you'll never be able to convince me that running
that's what I said.
3-point line is the
Yeah.
right thing, because like, there's no stat to account the difference between the shot quality of like Kyle Lowry being the one who mostly it is going to be a guard who's the one that's the first one back at the break. So like, that's a contested shot, but it's a different level of a contested shot because a guy's like 5 feet. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's Kyle Lowry as opposed to Bam. So like, there's a different level. It's like, yeah, it's a contested shot. But is it? You know, most of those guys are standing there trying to take a charge, right? And not really contesting the shot. So it's very interesting, right? So it's just an interesting like back and forth. And like, I love the fact that there are multiple ways to look at the same thing. And that's what makes sports to me anyways.
Yeah. And honestly, like, while people are busy having this conversation on regular, you know, mainstream, if you will, like sports shows, and being like, why are there so many blowouts? It's like, I just explained it for people. Like, that's why that's what it is. I think, and it's like, but they're going to,
like, it's the 3-point.
Oh, the people who are listening to this, get it, because this is a pretty smart audience, right? It's the people who, like, it's the, you know, I don't want to call out specific shows or whatever, but like, they're going to just sit there and they're going to be like, oh, no, look, this sucks. And like, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, unfortunately, that's just the nature of this game. And like, it's probably going to continue to be that way. And we're going to get like, it'll be way flukier when there's a close game, because honestly, like, the way all of this works, it should be fluky that a game after 200 possessions, so to speak, like, comes down to like, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of crazy that like teams that are scoring 100 points each would ever come down to a 1 or 2 point game. Like, that's kind of nuts, right? Like, yeah. But because we were going 2 points at a time for a really long time, we were getting games that were going to be coming down to that, right? Like, we're getting plenty of games that are quote unquote close games that are 8, 9, 10 point games. And that's what I mean by like, you shouldn't be afraid to lay the points if you think a team is going to win, because we might actually have a close game that finishes with an 8, 9, or 10 point spread, the way that we did in game 3.
Yeah. No, totally makes sense. And looking at that, our next couple games going on there, as mentioned, I'm going to be on in English. Game 6 going to be on Boston. What's the spread there? -7, and then -9. Pardon me. Going to be on Boston -9 in game 6 on Friday, and on Thursday, game 5. It's going to be Warriors -7 for me. Yeah, that would mean we have a very long layoff until next Thursday, which would be when the NBA Finals would be set to start. I'm pretty sure it's June 2nd.
June 2nd, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if we're talking Celtics Warriors, yeah, you could talk me into that playoff series for sure, NBA Finals series for sure. That'd be super interesting. We'll get back to the pod in a sec, but first, be a pro and win. Introducing DRF Sports' all-new premium data feature on drfs.com/sports. For $99 a year, which is just $8.25 a month, you can get industry-leading betting trends, angles, and analytics. With so many big sporting events here, it's the best way for you to make some money this postseason and have fun while doing it. That's DRF Sports Pro. Sign up now at drf.com/sports. But there's also another championship being had as we speak, and that is in the NHL. I know we took a lot of time there talking NBA, but can we kind of rifle through kind of quickly here some NHL and just what's going on in the NHL? What's
I mean, a lot.
Headlines?
The answer to that is a lot. And honestly, we should carve out more time for the NHL going forward because it's just frankly more interesting on a night-to-night basis. Not that interesting, right? The Lightning sweep the Panthers. We talked about that inevitability on Monday and the idea that like we might be headed for a 1-2-3 Cancun situation in the NHL and how rare that is. Of course, after we talked about that, the rumors started to swirl that the Florida Panthers might have been partaking in some local Tampa Bay nightlife. Tampa Bay apparently, couldn't tell you, never been, known for gentlemen's clubs. And apparently the Panthers were seen out carousing there, which I don't know if that's the explanation for the overall series stats for the Panthers, but here they are. Panthers 1 out of 30 on high danger chances. So you and I talked about like, what's your favorite high danger chance? You said a breakaway. Imagine having 30 breakaways and only converting 1. That's essentially the outlier type situation that we're talking about with regards to the Panthers there. And then on top of that, they went 1 of 13 on the power play. So you're basically never going to win a series by going 1 of 30 and 1 of 13 in those two situations. And a lot of times you're going to get swept. And honestly, if they could have played this in just a 3-game series, they would have been eliminated in that case too. Florida had more expected goals, 5-on-5 in 3 of the 4 games. But again, if you're creating a bunch of offense, but you're not actually converting that offense, you're not going to do anything there. Your guy, Andrei Vasilevsky, went from basically a mediocre goaltender in that Toronto series, obviously shutout in game 7. That's, if you want to talk about sort of the case of like pressurization, et cetera, how about Vasilevsky being meh for 6 games against Toronto and then coming up big in game 7? So the overall numbers look like 0 goals saved above expectation, meaning he was literally an average goaltender through the width of that series, the breadth of that series over 7 games. Now he comes into against Florida, over 10 goals saved above expectation. And that's important. That's an important number to remember here. 2.57 goals saved above expectation in 4 games. And so as much as we want to blame the Panthers for going 1 out of 30, we also have to give some credit to Vasilevsky for stopping some of these chances that frankly should have been goals. Whether you want to just attribute it mathematically, okay, the Panthers should have had 5, 6, maybe 7 goals on their high danger chances at even strength, or maybe they should have had 2, 3, or 4 power play goals, given that they had 13 power plays. You take those and you just give them credit right to Vasilevsky. Right? Because again, if you're stopping 10 more goals than you should over the course of 4 games, you are pretty awesome. Now, again, how do we predict this, right? We have Vasilevsky being okay in the first round. We have him being incredible in the second round. What are we going to expect from him in the third round? Now, maybe it's just a matter of Vasilevsky only wakes up by game 7 or even game 6 of a first round. And he's just sort of, along for the ride in the first 5 games. I don't know, right? That is a sort of narrative thing that might be true, because eventually you get to a point when the guy has won that many closeout, elimination, et cetera, games that you just go, yeah, this guy is different, right? The next best in this round is Shesterkin, who is trying to steal the Rangers yet another series. He's at 6.41. He is 4 goals saved above expectation below what we saw from Vasilevsky. So people are going to say that the Lightning have some like championship, like pixie dust, or like, this concept of like heart of a champion, yada, yada, yada. And that's probably true for how they grinded out, or at least somewhat true for how they grinded out against the Leafs. But this is really just 2 teams, and one team's goalie was awesome, combined with obviously the conversion ability of the Panthers, but it's sort of chicken and the egg, right? Are we blaming the Panthers, or are we giving credit to Vasilevsky? The answer is probably both. And that's why it's not a 6-game Lightning upset win. That's why it's not 5. That's why it's 4, right? So basically couldn't have gone worse for the Panthers. They're going to take a ton of heat as the President's Trophy winners. But as you mentioned in the Stanley Cup playoff preview, doesn't really get you all that far when it comes to winning the President's Trophy. Speaking of, we talked about everything happening in the NHL at this point. St. Louis and Colorado, absolutely electric hockey game. And if the game was in St. Louis, we'd be this would be a remember it forever type of a thing because of how the crowd would react when the road team comes back from 3-0 down and then scores, again, after being down 4-3, after just an outrageous Nathan MacKinnon performance, an outrageous Nathan MacKinnon goal, hat trick, all of that sort of thing. Imagine the home crowd if they had tied it and they had won in overtime, but instead you get the sad sort of like confused Avalanche fan, which I think a lot of people at home were maybe not sad, but certainly confused about how Colorado lost that game. The good news for us, our over 5.5 games bet cashes. I will fully admit, there's a lot of times we don't cash a bet where we had the great number, right? We had 3 chances with Pittsburgh to cash that series bet. We had, Boston at a really good price and going into a game 7, all that sort of stuff. And it just sort of doesn't go your way. Awful number relative to the money line yesterday. We had Blues we had the series over 5.5, which of course is essentially a Blues bet, over 5.5 at -140. And the Blues were plus 200 going into that game yesterday. And so this is one, chalk it back in our column as, I don't want to say lucky necessarily because we were right overall that this series would go over 5.5 games, but we certainly did not have the best of the number going in. And that's what we're trying to do with all of our bets. We're trying to have the best of the number when we get to sort of closing time, if you will. And whether that's closing line on the game starting or whether that's sort of the series price and how that evolves, we didn't have it. Didn't matter. We ended up pulling off the 4-3 comeback and the overtime win for the Blues. I wrote about how I backed the Blues after game 1 to get this essentially to a 6-game series, but essentially plus 1.5 on the series price. So now I've got the Blues at plus 240 to win this next game, a home game that they are plus 150 in. So guess what? Now I've got the better of the price. So all it takes is sort of one surprise, one way or another. And it could be a negative, could be a positive. In this case, for this series, it's a positive. Problem is, we're still dealing with Ville Husso. And again, credit to the Blues for coming back and winning that game, but I still don't trust what Husso is bringing to the table relative to what Binnington was bringing to the table. Because as much as we talk about the Jake Ottinger first round series, where he was 1.85 goals saved above expectation per game, right? So he's stopping essentially 2 goals that should be goals over the course of that 60-minute game. Binnington was still over 1 for his playoff efforts. So I don't think Ville Husso is going to be stopping 1 goal more. And in fact, he has been under the mediocre number of 0, right? He has been a minus so far. And so they get away with that yesterday because he makes a couple of saves. And I'm sure his numbers for last night were probably pretty decent. But going forward, it's not a guy that I'm dying to sort of press on here. That being said, you're getting plus 150 for a Blues team. If anybody out there, speaking of narratives or whatever, if you believe in momentum, whatever from game to game, the Blues plus 150 might be an interesting bet to see this, because Colorado, the big issue with Colorado is the question, are they different? And we've talked about the excuses that they've had, not even for negative play, but that people make for them as the concept of them being the best team. And with Binnington going out, as we talked about on Monday, it's just another example of us not getting to see how good Colorado can really be. We had the regular season where they were so banged up. It was probably the reason why they weren't the number 1 team, why they didn't win the President's Trophy. But we don't know for sure. They lost to Vegas last year without Nazem Kadri. You have seen in this postseason how important Nazem Kadri is as far as affecting a game or a series. And they didn't have him for the Vegas series and they lost. Would they have won if he had been around? The answer, of course, as always, maybe, right? The problem is we don't know. And they get Nashville in the first round without their starting goalie. They now get St. Louis without their best goaltender, their best chance to win this series. So the point is we don't know. But what that also brings into account is maybe Colorado is just that team that can't get it done. Now, I'm saying that as a question because honestly, I don't know. And they might go on the road and beat St. Louis. Colorado has been the better team. This isn't a, even strength metrics or any metrics type situation where you're going, oh, these teams are even and like I have to take the plus price. That's not what this is. Colorado has been sort of 57% to St. Louis's 43% in these previous 5 games that we've seen. So all of a sudden, with essentially 5 really good minutes for St. Louis, we've got ourselves a really interesting next game, which I didn't even think we were going to have a next game come Friday. I thought we were going to be completely dark come Friday night in the NHL. Completely opposite of dark, the electric factory that is Edmonton and Calgary is still going on. Shell, your guy, Mike Smith, Weiland again, 132-footer to tie the game. Sheldon is just shaking his head right now. Can't believe it. But the Oilers win anyway, right? So again, like that should sap momentum. Like that, everybody should have just got up and walked out of Rogers Place that night as soon as Mike Smith's giving up 132 footers and blaming it on like a screen. It's like, it's 132 feet, man. Like, get your eye on the puck at some point, right? I'm pretty sure the last guy to screen it was outside of the blue line anyway. So again, like, could Edmonton blow this? Absolutely. The good news is they've already clinched the +1.5 that we got from before the series started and then pressed on. Again, if you read my stuff over at The Score, we pressed on after game 1. So Cash City, all about that. Have a little +200 on the Oilers to win this series as well. So we're in this spot. Okay, you've got a great price. You have 3 chances to win a +200 bet here. Does that mean we're going to do it? Not necessarily, because Calgary could absolutely, they have been the better team. They, like Colorado, have been at about a 56 to 57, a little bit lower, 56% rate here. But Edmonton creates scoring chances that are awesome scoring chances. You and I talked about, like, is it just a matter of Connor McDavid creating, like, speaking of shot quality, right? Like, is he just creating that good of scoring chances for his teammates, and how like the metrics kind of get skewed from that standpoint? Still sitting on McDavid 22-1 to win the Conn Smythe from before the playoffs started in our preview with our guy, Michael Leboff. Flames with that expected goals advantage, like they have to win 3 straight games here. That implies at +425 that they're going to do so 19% of the time. So if you want to bet the Flames to win this series, obviously you have to decide, do you think it's going to happen more than 19% of the time? I kind of think it is by a couple of percentage points, but we're already sitting on the Oilers here. And so we don't have to do anything going forward. We don't have to grab the Oilers on the road at +130 in this game tonight. We don't have to do anything. We just have to sit back and hope the Oilers don't choke. And so basically that's the position that I'm in. And then there's finally the Rangers and the Hurricanes. And hopefully this is a situation like the Celtics series, where the Rangers winning, like the Heat winning in game 3, just gives us a second opportunity to add to a long-term Hurricanes position. That long-term position just being the series price. I'm not saying Stanley Cup. I'm not saying anything crazy like that. I'm just saying we get another shot here. The prices are getting better with Carolina. They open -145. I hit that. It's now up to -160 for this game, which is essentially where it was in game 1 and 2. But it just goes to show in the marketplace, after a couple of losses, road losses. By the way, Carolina still hasn't won a road game all postseason long, but they also haven't lost a home game either. And so this game tonight is being played at home. I still think Carolina has it in them to win on the road, but the problem is we're getting Shesterkin at peak Shesterkin at this point in time, right? We talked about game 3 and the metrics for that. Not all that different in game 4. Honestly, kind of a carbon copy type situation. Carolina didn't really help themselves. There's a couple of wide open nets that they missed that would have made that game a lot different. But again, that just gives us opportunity to bet on Carolina again. Could Shesterkin steal the series? Yeah, of course he could. But, before the playoffs, we use the regular season to figure out how good these teams are going to be at even strength relative to each other. We were right about the Penguins. Despite them being the underdog in the series, they were the better team. We've obviously talked at length about how in some way the Rangers managed to win that series. We talked about the Stars being closer than the odds gave anybody, gave them any credit for with regards to the Flames. That ended up going to overtime of game 7. All I can do is tell you who's going to play better in a neutral game state. And that has been Carolina. That's what we thought was going to happen with regards to Carolina. But again, if Shesterkin steals it, then he steals it. But that's what we do. We have to bet on the numbers, on the idea that one team is going to be better than the other. The Hurricanes have been still undefeated at home, piling back in on the Hurricanes tonight, still on the -1.5 series spread. But now you can get a decent price, -150 on the series as a whole. And you still have 2 home games for the Hurricanes. Again, still undefeated at home. So that's the situation over in the NHL, man. And it's a lot of action, a lot of late game action, and certainly very interesting with some potential matchups here. We could have an Avs Oilers McKinnon McDavid conference final. And even though I don't know how people get that excited about anything involving the Carolina Hurricanes, but a Hurricanes Lightning one would be really good. And honestly, if it somehow happened, Rangers, you get New York, you get the underdog element, you get Shesterkin doing Shesterkin things. Even a Rangers Lightning conference final would be interesting. I'm just hoping it doesn't come to that.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, it's interesting times for sure as both playoffs continue. And of course, where can people find you to get more of the stuff that you be putting out content wise?
Yeah, man, at MRuss Authentic on Twitter. Everything I do over at the Score gets retweeted through there. As we talked about on Monday, I had a big PGA championship. Following that up with a little Charles Schwab challenge this week. I know you're jacked up about the Charles Schwab challenge in Fort Worth, Texas. So doing a lot of golf stuff there, obviously the hockey stuff. And then we're going to start dipping our toe into a little thing called football. Maybe you've heard of it. So there's going to be a lot of summer football type stuff coming up here pretty soon. Working on a little college football, a little look ahead game of the year. Yeah, a lot of theory stuff happening right now. Not necessarily picks, but some sort of idea on like, why do you want to bet on a game of the year? We see different sports books have games up for like Ohio State, Michigan in November. Why would you bet that right now? We're going to talk about that coming up here on Friday and over the course of the weekend.
Sounds good, my dude. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll check in with you soon, man.
You got it, pal. Thanks so much.
And if you want to follow me online, you can do so on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander and on Twitter at Shell Alexander. Don't forget to like and subscribe to DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also rate us, review us, like us, all that other fun stuff. But for more from this new project from DRF Sports, just a little reminder, if you're unfamiliar with the letters DRF, it stands for Daily Racing Forum, which has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we've taken over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game, as well as the NBA, MLB, college sports, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every game, including offensive and defensive stats, betting angles, line movements, key injuries, team stats, and more. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. If you want access to all of the raw data, drf.com/sports. That's where you can find the usual previews as we deep dive into the games. Of course, I got you covered on this podcast. However you want your betting information, we've got you covered. Again, my name is Sheldon Alexander. That's all I got for now. But until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.